You are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode is brought to you by November Rain. Nothing lasts forever, and we both know hearts can change, and it's hard to hold a candle in the cold November rain.
Hello everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Rootbound. I'm your host, Steve, and Rootbound is the podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. And each episode, I invite a guest who shares a plant that means something to them, and then I share with the guest a plant that means something to me, and through this process, we all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. Before we meet our guest today, I want to talk about succulents because our guest will be sharing a succulent plant with us today, and I was thinking about that word and what does it really mean and some other things about it. And just to cut right to the chase, succulent, as you probably understand, it comes from a Latin word that essentially means juicy. And that's because succulents are a kind of plant mostly grown in dry climates that store water in specialized leaves or stems, and therefore they are quite juicy. So that is why they are called succulents. And also on the topic of succulents, I found this really great article by Elisa Bereznak in The Ringer about the history of succulents and how they have become so popular in recent years. And it's really fascinating. It has to do with a drought in California and perhaps their photogenic quality, but the popularity of succulents really has gone through the roof, and if you don't have one or many in your home, you probably know someone who does.
Oh, there you are. What a delightful little home office you've created for yourself.
Thank you.
Succulents and all.
Hi, Adarsh. Welcome to Rootbound.
Aloe there, Steve. Lovely to be here.
Very good. I think we might have a hint of what plant you're going to choose. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. The plant I'm going to be discussing today is aloe.
Wonderful. We talked about aloe briefly in the episode. We were talking about agave because they look pretty similar, and I learned they are related, but not maybe as related as we think. But anyway, why is aloe meaningful to you? I think I have a reason why, but maybe you want to share that with the audience and maybe go deeper because I don't know the whole story.
Indeed, yeah. So I'm working on a community called Aloe that's dedicated to climate action, a community that you're part of, and we're privileged to host you. So Aloe, the startup is inspired, in the name at least, by the plant I'm going to be talking about today, aloe vera. And yeah, excited to talk more about both types of aloe with you.
Wonderful. So yeah, let's maybe get into a little bit more. Let's talk about why is your project, this community called Aloe, and what and how is that related to the plant?
Right. So aloe is just a funny way for us to say hello, as you may have noticed in the beginning. And the project really started with my co-founder and I, Sloane and I, recognizing during COP26 that we were really frustrated with the lack of climate action that was being taken at the high levels of businesses and governments. And we had this personal moment of reckoning in parallel where we looked a bit in the mirror and asked ourselves whether are we doing enough? Do we even know enough about the actions we're taking, what the impact is, and so on? And the honest answer was no. So Aloe started as a pet project to see how we ourselves could lower our environmental footprints, become climate smarter, and become more climate active. And as we spoke to more of our friends and people in the Gen Z community, and for all of us, it's really an existential crisis. And as we spoke to more folks discussing how they are combating this existential crisis, we realized that sustainability at the heart of it is really a difficult problem. It can be lonely, it can be stressful, it's complicated, it's overwhelming, it's all of the above. And Aloe now, it really flips that around and it makes sustainability easy, accessible, and fun. So we are a community that's dedicated to climate engagement and action. And there are two key pillars to this. We're starting with the community-led experience. So environmental action is much more powerful when done as a community. There's also a lot to learn from each other. But more importantly, it's about inspiring and collaborating with one another in the context of climate action. So on Aloe, we have climate forums, challenges that allow people to learn about how they can take climate actions and then share their accomplishments and statistics with their friends.
Very cool. Yeah, that's very well said. I just kind of got on Allo just the other day, and it's already pretty fun to kind of like communicate with people who have similar passions, and yeah, so it's a lot of fun. So before we maybe get into the plant, maybe just one more question. What was that moment when you decided, hey, we're going to name our project after a plant?
It was I would say somewhat coincidental. We wanted a name that made sustainability seem approachable. It's sort of like that iconic Steve Jobs moment where he wanted the computer to say hello, and we were thinking, well, what could we name our startup that sort of gave this impression of sustainability being welcoming, it being easy and accessible. And the closest thing we can think of in terms of hello was aloe. And of course, aloe vera has so many connotations in terms of its healing properties and so on, which we'll dig into further. And so we thought of aloe. It was probably the quickest decision we made in sort of the history of aloe, or the brief history of aloe. So that's a bit of the etymology of aloe, the startup, if you will.
Very, very good. I think there's some other things I have thoughts about that I think will fit more when we start talking about the plant itself. But yeah, let's get into it. Do you have some fun facts or dazzling details about aloe?
Yes. So the first fun fact is that aloe is a succulent, and it's probably the most popular succulent out there. And for anyone who thinks otherwise, I challenge them to name a more popular one. I know you did an episode on cacti, and so there's often this confusion when it comes to cactus and succulent, right? And so another fun fact, if you will, uh, is that cacti are succulents, but not all succulents are cacti. And and so aloe vera is a case in point. It's not a cactus, but it is a succulent. It's part of the, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Asphodeliaceae family, and it's not part of the Cactaceae or the cactus family.
Very interesting. Now, I think I have an idea of this, so maybe we can bounce back and forth a little bit, but do you happen to know the definition of that word succulent? I mean, we know what the word succulent means when it comes to like food or something, but like for plants, like what, for the audience, what does that mean?
Yeah, so my understanding is that succulents are essentially plants with thick, fleshy, engorged parts. Their main feature or characteristic is their ability to retain water, and they're often found in arid regions because of that. I'm not sure if that is quite the definition, or if that's more like the central characteristics of succulents.
Yeah, I think that's right. My understanding is that they have that ability to store water in their stem, their specialized stems, right? And that's what makes them a succulent. And yes, cacti do that, but lots of other plants do that, like aloe. So very interesting. Yeah, so let's. I guess that actually leads me to thinking about, when you're thinking about climate and why aloe is a perfect plant to talk about climate is because it is a plant that is resilient.
Yes,
it can live in extreme environments, and so I think that's a nice little metaphor there for talking about climate resilience.
Definitely, and part of the coincidence of calling ourselves aloe, completely agree. And to that point, right? Sort of. I want to dig a little deeper into some of the physical features of aloe, related to what you mentioned about succulents, and how they sort of store water and they're really efficient with their water. Aloe stores a bulk of its water essentially in its leaves. And it's part of the super famous aloe vera gel that's used for so many sort of moisturizers and other sort of skin regimens, and so the leaf of the aloe vera plant is thick, it's fleshy, it's green colored, and there are really three big parts to it, right? So on the outer side you have the rind, then you have the yellow latex a bit in the middle, and then the bulk of the leaf is the inner part is really the aloe vera gel, which like 99% of it is water, and the remaining are solids of 200 different compounds and components like polysaccharides, vitamins like B12, amino acids, and so on, which lend the gel a lot of its immunological beneficial properties.
Wow, fascinating. Over 200 compounds, you said?
Yeah, inside the gel, yeah.
So fascinating. Yeah, I thinking about that gel, it is such an interesting thing, and oh man, and it's like 99% water, but it can still like have that form and like have so much stuff going on. It's very, very fascinating. Yeah, do you know any more details about like, I don't know, let's maybe talk about some of those uses maybe. Do you have I know some common ones. I mean, for me it's like sunburn is a big one.
Yep.
But I don't know, I'm actually not like a huge aloe head, so to speak. So yeah, I wonder if you have any other thoughts on how it's used.
Yeah, so it's used for skin issues or burns. It's also been used for other skin-based ailments like psoriasis, and really a lot of those, as I mentioned earlier, the beneficial properties come from the compounds, the solids that exist in the aloe vera gel. Besides the skin part of it, the other medicinal value is we're seeing a lot of juices and other edible items containing aloe, and there's at least this notion that it's beneficial in the gastro area. It can help with issues like constipation and so on. And so aloe vera juice is quite popular to address some, any stomach related or gastro related issues one might have.
Very, very interesting. Where is aloe native to? Where is it from?
Yeah, it's native to the Arabian Peninsula, so closer to the Oman country. There are
Fascinating.
mountains there, and that's where aloe can be traced back to. But now it's basically on all continents except for Antarctica.
Wow, yeah, it's a very widely cultivated plant. Yeah,
exactly. And so in some regions, it's sort of classified as an invasive species. So certain types of aloe can be invasive. So that's something to be a little careful with, right? But yeah, to answer your question, it's from the Arabian Peninsula. And digging a little deeper into the history of the plant, I believe the first records of using aloe vera for sort of its beneficial properties comes from the Egyptians. In fact, the Egyptians termed aloe vera as the plant of immortality. And at least judging by some of the blog posts I was reading about the plant, the first written reports of it go as far back as 6,000 years ago. Some of the more legit ones I've seen have said that it go back around 2000 BC, and it was used by Egyptian queens like Cleopatra and Nefertiti. So
wow.
Yeah, for their sort of daily skincare routine.
Amazing. I mean,
yeah,
that's some really old school skincare stuff, and still like very, very popular. That's really cool. Do you have any other fun facts or dazzling details about aloe vera?
Yeah, so we spoke about the sort of etymology of aloe, the climate action app. I want to dig a little deeper into the etymology of aloe vera.
Awesome! I love the etymology of the like scientific names of things. So.
Yeah. So let's start with the second part of the name, Vera, which it's not too hard to guess. It sort of means truth or genuine. And I guess if you are familiar with the term like veracity, which means accuracy, it sort of makes sense. It sort of adds up.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
And do you know why it got that name? I guess, I mean, like, why is it a truthful plant?
I'm honestly not. That's a great question.
Yeah, no worries.
Not quite sure about that one.
Maybe it is the true aloe. Maybe there's some other aloes they don't consider the true one. Maybe, I don't know. Just speculating. I'm never afraid to tell the audience to Google it if we don't know an answer. That's very fair. And then yes, the aloe part. What does that mean?
Yeah, maybe when they asked for the real aloe to stand up, it was aloe vera that stood up, or this specific ending called aloe vera. With aloe, there's a bit more uncertainty around where aloe originates from and what it means. So some articles I looked up said it's not clear what it means, and then another one I read mentioned that it derives from the Arabic word aloe. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, which means shining bitter substance, which sort of makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But the as we explored earlier, aloe for us at Aloe is just a more fun way to say aloe or hello. So there you go.
Hello.
Did you say hello?
No, I said hello, but that's close enough.
Well, wonderful. Yeah. So thank you for sharing about aloe. Do you mind if I share a plant with you?
Of course, yeah. I'd love to learn more.
So yeah, it's always like what plant I'm going to choose, and sometimes I try to pick something that's going to match what we're talking about. But I didn't do that in this case. I was just thinking about what plants grow in my garden, and this is a plant that I didn't purposely grow in my garden. I have a lot of plants that are maybe quote unquote weeds, which we talk about on the show a lot of. Really, what is the definition of a weed?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a plant where I was like, this was maybe 3 years ago or so. I was out in my yard and I saw this little tiny bush, maybe like, well, not even a bush, a little tiny plant. It was maybe less than a foot tall, and it looked like it was like, are those little cherry tomatoes popping up in my garden? And so I started looking closer. And this is, I think, the first kind of maybe lesson from this plant is the importance of really learning how to ID a plant, because they did look like little cherry tomatoes. But as I found out, I didn't eat any. Just to put that out there. I used an app and I did some research and found out that it's a plant called Carolina horsenettle, which is Solanum carolinensis, and though related to the tomato, it is poisonous. So,
right.
And they do look like just little beautiful green cherry tomatoes, and they lay out. And I don't know if you've heard of this plant before, but
I have never heard of the name.
Yeah, it's pretty common in like disturbed areas. It grows really well in a lot of different places, and it's kind of all over. I think maybe it's maybe a bit more in the south. I don't think it grows maybe as far north as you are up in Chicago, but right. I could be wrong. It's called horsenettle. I couldn't actually figure out why it's called horsenettle. I think it's because there's cases where horses have eaten it and actually gotten sick, perhaps. But the nettle is related to it comes from that plant that are called the nettles in Europe, which are stinging. And this is not a nettle, but it does have prickles. It does have thorns or prickles. So that's another thing. When I first saw it, I saw the little tomato shape, and I was like, those look exactly like tomatoes, and they really do. But then I saw the leaf, and the leaf has a little bit more of like an oak leaf shape. So the little multi-lobes, and it had all these like prickles. And I'm like, well, tomatoes leaves don't look like that, and they definitely don't have these thorns. So that's when I Googled it and found out what it is.
That's awesome. Is this still growing in your backyard?
Yeah, it's in my front yard. It grows mostly under my peach tree, and this is one of the things where like when something pops up in my garden and I don't know what it is, I tend to just let it grow and see what it is. I want to know what it is. Right. And in this case, it was a pleasant surprise because this is a plant that is native to this area. And although it doesn't have really, I guess there are some documented medicinal uses, even though I would caution the audience to definitely not experiment with that because it is toxic. It is native, and I have a quote here that I found. I'm actually missing the website it was from, but it said, at least 32 insects alone in Virginia have been documented feeding on this plant.
Wow. Okay.
So this is a plant, it's not for us. It's for, wildlife. It's for other, native things. And, there's many people who consider this a noxious weed and do everything they can to try to get rid of it.
Right.
And I always wonder if, like, what is the wisdom in getting rid of a plant, particularly a plant that is native. There's lots of invasive species. We talked about that a couple episodes ago about invasive species, and even some invasive species, the question of like what their role is more complicated than sometimes we give it. But definitely treating, I think, a native plant as a noxious weed and calling it noxious, I think requires a little bit of a readjustment of the way we think about plants. So I don't
Yeah.
I don't want it to take over, but 3 or 4 years in, it hasn't really spread that much and
Right.
become troublesome. And I'll end up mowing sometimes when it's coming up in smaller stuff because I have some small patches I need to mow. But more or less, I let it do its thing, and I when whatever animals like to eat it, really love to eat it.
I completely agree with the point you're making, which is sometimes I think we let the utility of the plant dictate too much of our decisions,
Yeah,
in determining whether it should stay or go, or whether we should sort of buy it and import it and so on. And often I think we forget that native plants are the reason they're native to an area over like thousands of years is largely because of functions like evolution and like finding the right balance, right? And so I, I I completely agree that we should be a bit more respectful of the things we are looking to destroy or remove. Do our research first, and then decide whether should this truly even go. Particularly because of the problem that we often encounter with the loss of balance between invasive species and native plants and native
yeah,
species, right? So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, one example, and I don't know if this is directly related to the Carolina horsenettle. I have quite a I've mentioned a few episodes that my yard can look like sometimes a mildly controlled meadow. I have some stuff that's planted, but I do leave a lot of things that are like growing
Right.
naturally. But it is very clear to me that the birds in my neighborhood like our yard more than almost any other neighbor. And because maybe there's a plant like horsenettle that's attracting 32 different kinds of native insects,
Yeah,
that birds are probably very happy to come
exactly.
have that amongst other plants that I have like that are often treated as weeds that are not, but they're native. So yeah, I think it's a cool plant. It looks really cool. Just the warning: just because you see something that looks like a tomato out there,
Mm,
don't eat it. And that's because it is in the nightshade family, which tomatoes are nightshades,
right.
potatoes are nightshades. There are several edible things in the nightshades, but the vast majority of nightshades
Hmm.
are poisonous, and that name nightshade actually comes from its like ability to put you to sleep. And there's like classic stories of like there's a European nightshade, which is I think the original name, that is used as like a sleeping poison or even a murder poison.
Wow.
And it's because they have this compound called solanine in them.
Right.
Um, and that's the compound, and it's a pretty complicated, I guess, its mechanism for how it like injures you. But even tomatoes have small amounts of solanine in them. Um, so I found that pretty interesting.
That well, maybe next time I'm feeling a little unable to sleep, maybe I'll just have a bit of tomato juice or something.
Yeah. The other one little, this is not a potato episode, but the one thing just comes up when we're talking about solanine is that often plants that are in the nightshade family will produce solanine when they are feeling stressed or some kind of attack. So
Ooh.
like the solanine is it's an insecticide for them. They use it to protect themselves of being like eaten by either insects or herbivores. And so if a plant that in the nightshade family is getting some kind of stress, it may react by increasing its levels of solanine. And one way that can happen in your kitchen, and like I said, this is not directly related to horsenettle, but talking about solanine, is that if you have potatoes and they're not in the dark, the light is a stressor to the potato tuber, and the potato can create solanine, and you can actually your potatoes can become toxic if they're not stored in a dark situation. So be aware of that.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, solanine. I don't know about the pronunciation. I think it's solanine. Yeah. And that comes from a Latin word. In fact, the genius of the Carolina horsenettle is Solanum carolinensis. So it's from Carolina, but it's a solanum, and that word solanum or solanine, it comes from a Latin word meaning quieting. So it like, I guess if you eat too much of it, you just start to like fade out.
Wow.
Yeah.
The point that you mentioned about protecting itself from sort of herbivores reminds me that aloe vera as a plant also has these tendencies to repel or at least not attract certain types of insects.
Mm.
Right. So It's not maybe as potent as I think like eucalyptus in terms of warding away different types of insects, but it is pretty effective relative to other plants. For some reason or another, that's something I probably should explore a bit more as well. But I do know that aloe vera uh, has some sort of properties or characteristics that keep sort of some insects at bay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm trying to. I think where I heard this was this guy on Instagram who goes by Country Gentleman Cooks, and he's got lots of great plant information. I think it's him. If it was someone else, apologies. I'll link in the show notes. But he mentioned, and it really clicked home to me. He mentioned that every plant, no plant wants its leaves to be eaten, right? And so all plants have developed some kind of mechanisms to prevent that from happening, right? Because the leaves are how they get their energy, and sometimes we're, as humans, have been able to like exploit those characteristics because sometimes they're not so bad. And we've also been able to selectively breed plants. Like lettuce doesn't exist in the wild. We have selectively bred it to not have bitter leaves. But in general, I think before lots of cultivation of leafy greens existed, leafy greens were cooked because so many of those leafy greens did have stuff that wasn't very digestible, and so cooking is a way to like get around that. So I think that's interesting with these two plants, they aloe and Carolina horsenettle. They do have these strategies to prevent their like powerhouse from being eaten, which is it's very interesting.
That's super fascinating, and I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but
I love tangents. It's cool.
That reminds me of the eucalyptus. Also, is like I think it does really well in terms of warding away its leaves from being eaten because it can be quite toxic, right? And in fact, like eucalyptus oil has been used to ward off mosquitoes and so on. But it's interesting how the balance of ecosystems work, because you have these adaptations that trees and plants take to ward off herbivores and just survive. But then you also have these counter strategies. So, for example, I believe the only animal or being, and I could be wrong, but at least one of the very, very few that can actually consume eucalyptus leaves are koalas.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, and that's their entire sort of survival strategy, is to eat eucalyptus leaves and sleep for 20 hours because it's really difficult to digest eucalyptus leaves. And also the thing is, if you eat just most of your diet is eucalyptus leaves, you also taste pretty bad yourself. So you're not the predators aren't as interested in you. Humans aren't as necessarily interested in you eating you either.
And nobody to compete with your meals for either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you take this big hit of we actually several episodes. I have a friend who was on the show who is super into animal facts, and she talked about that a little bit. And the koalas have a special bacteria in their gut that can help them break down the toxins. But it's such a funny strategy, but it works. I mean, they have to be really slow and not move that much because they don't get very much energy from it at all.
Exactly.
But they have zero competition for food. So very interesting. And I think maybe some of these plants, some of these insects that are eating the horsenettle are probably similar. Like, it's a toxic plant, but they have this, if being able to consume it gives you an advantage, at least in certain times,
Indeed. And like two sort of small facts related to that is with the koalas is obviously it's sad because they've been declared mathematically to be functionally extinct, which means eventually, they're just not reproducing enough to offset the loss of koalas, especially with wildfires and all that happening with greater frequency. But the other aspect with koalas is there's different species or subspecies of eucalyptus, right? So when they latch on to a certain sort of specific species or type of eucalyptus tree, rather, they're not going to let it go. So if they find something else that doesn't quite taste right, they would rather just not eat and perish instead of switching to like a slightly different diet. So that's another fun fact just related to this whole tangential conversation I want to throw out there.
Very, very interesting. It's a fun thing of this podcast where you can start off talking about social networks and end on koalas and go through various plants and stuff all along the process. So that's very great. And thank you for joining on this episode of Rootbound.
Lovely to be here. Steve, I would be remiss if I didn't mention two things before I go,
please.
Which is, firstly, I love your voice. You have like a voice of God sort of aesthetic.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love the fake ads y'all do. I think it's genius that the most annoying part of the podcast listening experience has been turned on its head and been made into something so humorous. So I just wanted to mention that I love your podcast, and those two things in particular for me really stand out. So it was an honor being here, and thank you so much for having me, sharing a bit more about aloe vera and sharing a bit more about aloe.
Well, thank you for joining me. And yes, I don't know when, but there will be an aloe fake ad at some point in the future.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, here at the end of the show, I have to talk about dinosaurs from space. Bear with me. After talking with Adarsh about aloe, I had this image in my brain of a dinosaur named Aloe. And I had this very, very nostalgic feeling, and so I had to try to Google what I was thinking about. And there was this one particular moment of a cartoon that just popped into my brain after talking with Adarsh, and it was about this dinosaur named Aloe. Now, this dinosaur, I have found out through Googling now, he wasn't called Aloe. His name wasn't spelled the same. It wasn't A-L-O-E. It was A-L-L-O because he was an Allosaurus. And he was the main character in a cartoon from the 80s that apparently I watched called Dinosaurs. I guess that some writers thought that, dinosaur and saucer sounded similar. And so, yes, they're dinosaurs from space. The main dinosaur was named Aloe. And this moment that popped into my brain when speaking about the plant was this moment where Aloe goes back to his home planet, and he goes home to visit his wife. And I'll just let that scene play out for you now.
Aloe!
Vera!
Yes, there was a little pun in there that the wife's name was Vera, so I think the writers wrote it just so that they could say aloe vera. And I remember as a kid going, oh, I got that joke. So anyway, that was something I wanted to share with you. Completely unplant related, except for a little plant pun in a 1980s cartoon about dinosaurs from space.
We used to be 4 ordinary teenagers. Until one day, we met some new friends from out of town. They were called dinosaurs. My friends and I became the secret scouts, allies to these dinosaurs from outer space, and joined in their battles against Genghis Rex and the evil Tyrannos.
The dinosaurs are leaving, Bossasaur. Well, follow them!
My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Adarsh Kumar. Adarsh is the co-founder of Aloe, the app, not the plant. Aloe is a community-led marketplace dedicated to climate action. You can sign up at aloe.circle.so. If you like listening to Rootbound and you want to help it keep going, you can learn ways to support the show at rootboundpodcast.com/support. Rootbound is hosted by Steve Ellington, ally to the dinosaurs from outer space. Music by Christian Kriegescota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, find a little succulent and tell it, aloe.
Do you need some time on your own? Do you need some time all alone? Try November Rain. November Rain. It's November Rain.